So it's 10 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Manufacturing Economic Forecast webinar. I'd like to thank Purdue MEP for their partnership with the IMA and assistance with the program today. If you would like any more information on how they assist manufacturers with their toughest challenges, please visit mep.purdue.edu, and I will put that in the chat function as well. So all the attendees will be muted in the duration of the program, but please feel free to utilize the chat function that's in the webinar. And if we are unable to get to your questions, we will be sure to follow up afterwards. So to begin today's program, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Frohlich. He is the director of the Kelley School for Excellence in Manufacturing, and his research interests are in manufacturing strategy and automation. And Dr. Frohlich is among the top 50 most cited academics in the field of operations management. So thank you for presenting to us today, Dr. Frohlich, and I will turn it over to you for the economic forecast.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I was sitting here thinking the last time I had the privilege of working with the Purdue MEP and the IMA doing something like this was out at the airport, and probably some of you were there a few years ago, and we were talking about trade and tariffs. So I'm looking forward actually to the next time we get together in a few years. And we're going to be able to talk about other topics to come. There's always someone at one of these presentations who shows up with a tie and PowerPoint slides, and that happens to be me today. And what I'm going to do is about 15 minutes or so talk about some of my thoughts, but they're more than my thoughts. They're kind of a conglomeration of different thoughts around where our economy might go with a focus on manufacturing here in 2021. And I just wanted to start off with a slide. I teach all our undergrad and grad students in our supply chain majors forecasting. And to keep them humble, and I guess today to also keep myself and the rest of us a bit humble, I always like to remind people of the famous quote by the economist Galbraith. You know, there are two kinds of forecasters, those who don't know, and I think that's me right now, and probably most of us about 2021. And then the more dangerous types out there are the people who don't know that they don't know. If you've read anything in regards to what might happen this year, you'll see comments like unique, the hardest year to forecast in 100 years, those kinds of things. And I certainly agree with that. The challenges of forecasting 2021 are extremely unique, extremely difficult. As I was getting ready for this presentation, I was thinking about what baseline year do I use? Do I talk pre-COVID, 2019? Do we talk the first half of 2020? Do we talk the second half of 2020? I think the baseline going forward probably for us is maybe the last quarter of 2020 as we project on into what might happen here in 2022. So many assumptions right now. Where are consumers at in terms of consumer confidence and spending? We were all surprised a few weeks ago when COVID mutating. Hopefully it won't mutate again, or if it does, the vaccines that are rolling out will take care of that. And of course, there's possibilities with regulations, another stimulus bill, taxes, on and on. And even when we think, you know, we have our assumptions around vaccines set. If you saw this morning, Johnson & Johnson's in the final data analysis of their one-shot vaccine, and they think that that vaccine will become available next month. So many assumptions now that have to be incorporated into forecasts. When you do forecasting, a lot of times you want to go look for historical precedents. Is it okay to use the Great Recession as maybe partly something to model in today's forecast? Or you might even go back 100 years ago, because of course the Spanish flu was followed by the famous Roaring 20s as they came out of that pandemic there too. So those are some things to keep in mind. And I think as you hear the panelists talk today and reflect on your own organizations going forward, you have to think about the scenarios as always. What's the worst case for your business? What's the expected case? And then hopefully we hit the best case, whatever that may be in your particular business. So when I was given this opportunity to speak to you all about a week or two ago, I was thinking, oh boy, why me? Why do I have to be the one to do this? But as I started thinking about, okay, what do I show you? What do I discuss with you? I begin to think about what do I teach my students? What do I rely on in my research? And the Federal Reserve is certainly an organization you want to look to for insight. There's a couple of famous indices, the consumer confidence, and then of course the manufacturing indice by the ISM. And I'll talk about all three of those. But also our own Indiana University Kelley School of Business has long generated a very powerful forecasting model and forecasts that are put out in the fall of each year. So I'm going to kind of hop through each of these three areas and share insights from these three leading thought leaders, opinion, formers out there in industry. And then I'll come back and share some of my thoughts and take a few questions later on. Good timing on this webinar because the Federal Reserve spoke yesterday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I logged right on then. They haven't had a beige book out since early December. And these are quotes that just came out less than 24 hours ago. Of the 12 Fed districts, 9 are kind of okay, 3 were down. So modest activity across our country. Consumer spending, as you can imagine, with lockdowns and some social distancing and some of those things and industries being hit hard, is still relatively weak. And about the second or third paragraph in, they get to our area, manufacturing. And they report that in almost all the districts, manufacturing activity is recovering. And then there's a curious thing that has started to show up back in December and has continued on in January, modest price increases. We wouldn't call this inflationary pressures yet. And you've probably seen this in some of your businesses, increase in the input prices as opposed to price increases on the finished goods and the service side of your business. We're in the Chicagoland district, Indiana as a state, and very similar to what the Fed reported nationally, manufacturing is increasing moderately. Consumer spending is slightly increasing. Financial conditions more or less the same. And I think, again, the Chicago district was fairly similar to many of the other districts that represent manufacturers. So just hold that in the back of your mind. The next beige book will come out in about a month. They don't come out every 4 weeks. But as we go forward this spring, you'll definitely want to log on each time and see what the Fed is seeing in its data and reporting in their beige books. Consumer confidence probably is the one that worries me the most. It's been trending down, and the next index for this comes out at the end of the month on, I think, January 6th. But this is December, and it was down again. Worldwide, it's down even lower than the US. And the Consumer Confidence Board also tracks and predicts economic performance, and they predict that the US will be up slightly next year. I thought this was curious. Japan is predicted to slightly outperform China next year. And of course, the UK, and we've heard about the UK virus and such, is looking like they're going to have a rough year in 2021. This is why I said I'm worried. We're nowhere near the Great Recession level for consumer confidence, but we are below the baseline 100. So if you're over 100, you're in non-recessionary territory, and we're hovering just below it right now. So obviously, that may affect many of you, most of your industries, but that's one we'll definitely want to watch going forward. And again, they update that indice soon, and I would watch that one across the rest of this winter and spring into summer, and hopefully that'll move back up and get us out of the recession territory. I'm sure many of you have been following the Institute for Supply Management's famous manufacturing Purchasing Manager Index. That has been good news for us. It's been trending up positive for the last 7 months. And the overall economy, as they've been tracking it, has also been trending upwards. And again, the manufacturing sector is looking fairly good. A lot of data here, but again, this index has been running since just after World War II. That's the Great Recession, and here's where we are now. And again, you can see us trending up. And again, this index was reported as of last December, so we'll see here in a week or so what they report for January. So again, as many of you know, and again, I think the panelists will report on some of that here later this morning, we've been holding our own in manufacturing. We really need to see consumer confidence bound back, and hopefully we'll just move on up and out of being near the recessionary threshold and get back into better times. The third group I want to reference to is our own Kelley School Indiana Business Research Center, IBRC, we call it for short, and it's kind of in small print up here, but 95 years. And we have some of the best economists and finance faculty in the world, and they've built a very powerful financial model of the US economy. In fact, the Federal Reserve has oftentimes said that IBRC has one of the best models of the US economy. And our faculty updated in this, well, year round, but in the summer, they do analysis in September, October, and then they report out to managers like yourself in industry in the fall. So this is from November of this year, and these are some of my colleagues that have been involved. These slides will be available to you, and you can click on that website and go back to it. And when you click on each of these tabs, this is the one I'm going to show you now in the next few screen snapshots on Indiana, but you can see what we're predicting for the US overall, the international market, the financial markets. And in the good old days, you know, I'm talking to 2019, I used to get to go on the road with my Kelley School colleagues, and I would go to places like Evansville and Fort Wayne and Louisville and Kokomo, and maybe I had a chance to meet some of you back then, and we would talk about the regional forecast. But you can click on some of these too, and you'll see that the information is tailored around the different parts of our state. Whoops, hit the wrong key. So what we're seeing, again, going back November, is last year was awful for us. Actually, the first quarter, we underperformed the United States. So we were down almost 6%, and the US dropped about 5%. Second quarter, we also trailed the nation. Those were both, unfortunately, historic declines for us here in Indiana. But our prediction going forward, and again, I think this is coming true right now, is that this past fourth quarter and going into 2021, the first quarter is still going to be rough for us. Probably little, if any, growth because of, you know, both the vaccine rollout and COVID spiking. But our prediction is in the second half of this year and going into 2022 that we should see positive growth start to return, and 2022 should be a pretty good year for us all. And some other quotes out of the Indiana report. We feel like our state's relatively well positioned to outperform some of our peer states in the US as a whole as we get through this recovery. And I think you see that in the speed and now some of the success we're having with the vaccine rollout as an example. And we still have, you know, relatively good compared to other states workforce participation, but we still have folks that are out of the workforce that should be re-entering this year. And so you can see back in April with the lockdowns and shut-ins that Indiana took a big unemployment hit, and now this is as of September, we rebound pretty nicely. And I would imagine we'll get back down where kind of Wisconsin and Iowa is in terms of unemployment going through 2021 and back into 2022. And then the Great Recession, because this study and our model has been run for many decades now, was relatively long, as we know, perhaps not as sharp and as deep as the pandemic recession, particularly the way this cut into various industries and some of the things we saw in the last 8 or 9 months. But the good news is that while, you know, we took severe damage, we recovered fairly quickly. And assuming that there's no lockdown for our state in 2021, we should be in good shape too to ride on out this pandemic and into the recovery. And again, we don't believe that there'll be a lockdown in our state given the knowledge and the vaccines that are rolling out in terms of dealing with the pandemic. And my final slide, I looked around for a projection of where we're going to go forward. And don't panic on this. This was McKinsey in June of last year, 8 months ago. I mean, that seems like a long time ago, but back in June of last year, nobody thought the vaccines would be ready. So everybody was saying in a couple or 3 years after the vaccine's ready, you know, we can start to heal our economy. So when this report came out in June of last year, it was predicting that our sector and many others probably wouldn't really get into recovery into 2024, early 2025. But I think you can safely slice 2 years off of this McKinsey report from last summer and say that as, again, you know, we go through 2021, get into 2022, probably by early 2023 at the latest, we should, in terms of GDP and economic recovery, be just about there. So those are some high-level thoughts, some very important groups I think you want to keep an eye on here in 2021. And I'll take any questions we have. And again, like most of you or all of you, I'm looking forward to hearing what the panelists have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Frohlich. It's really interesting information to see what our economy is going to look like as we move into 2021. You mentioned that Indiana is well positioned to outperform our peer states. Could you kind of dive into exactly what makes us unique and how we recover from the pandemic?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you. Well, as many of you probably know, and if not, you can go back to the IMA website and find it. Last year in the fall, actually summer and fall last year, our annual Indiana manufacturers study was focused on COVID. And so that special edition of our annual study, digging into what you all are doing in industry in terms of COVID preparedness, had some very interesting information. And so when we analyzed that data and again wrote up that report last fall, you could see pretty clearly that not only did Hoosier manufacturers do so many things right, and again, you know, in terms of your factories, in terms of protecting your workforces, and also coordinating with your supply chains and such, that it really did position us well in here in 2021 and 2022 to benefit from that. So a lot of the COVID fundamentals, if you will, I think by our state were done right 6, 7 months ago, and now that's positioned us for the recovery. Also, if you think of our industries, there's a tremendous pent-up demand for many products, and I think that'll favor the automotive manufacturers, some of the industrial manufacturers, and others in our state. And then finally, if you think about maybe not so much manufacturing, but how our state is positioned, you know, with online commerce, warehousing, supply chain issues, that also really has positioned our state well to recover.
Thank you. And what are you seeing in regard to automation investment?
Wow, that's an interesting one too. 2 years ago, our annual study with IMA and Kat Sapper-Miller, and again, many of you probably have participated in those over the years, was all about Industry 4.0 and advanced automation. And in that study a couple years ago, we were predicting that Industry 4.0 would continue to slowly deploy across our state, across the nation, across the world here in the 2020s. Last year we asked, or well, last fall in the COVID special edition, we asked some questions on automation, and it looks like the pace is accelerating. And indeed, you know, some of you probably have done that. There are places where automation, it's probably safer for the workers not to be in there because of the possibility of catching the virus and those kinds of things that are being automated. And also just the fact that maybe we as consumers have gotten more comfortable with online delivery, you know, .com retail and everything like that. This past year is probably going to accelerate the uptake in automation back up across supply chains. So maybe a year or two from now, I'll come back and do another thing with the MEP and the IMA, and we'll probably be talking about the accelerating pace of many Hoosier businesses adopting automation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And, you know, this is great information. We really appreciate your time today. And if we didn't get to all of the questions, I will be sure to follow up with Dr. Frohlich and get all the questions answered. And you did mention you were okay with us sharing these slides after.
Oh, absolutely. And feel free to reach out and contact me too if you have any issues.
Great.
Again, I appreciate the chance to do this. I knew I was going to have to do this talk with my undergrads and grads in a couple of weeks, so it was actually great to go ahead and get my homework done early and have a chance to spend this morning with managers like yourselves. So thank you.
Thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So for the next segment of the program today, we will hear from a panel of manufacturers and their personal business insights. And if you are joining us a little bit later in the program right now, my name is Malika Butler, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President of Governmental Affairs with the Indiana Manufacturers Association. And I will be co-moderating our next panel with Renee Stewart, who serves as the Senior Associate Director with Purdue MEP. And she will be introducing our panelists and get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Malika, and thank you, Dr. Frohlich, for that overview in terms of what to expect for the upcoming year. I'm pleased to introduce our three panelists for this morning's discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Jody Fledderman. He has worked for Batesville Tool and Die his entire life, starting when he was 16 years old. He's worked in nearly every department, including tooling, sales, quality, engineering, and administrative. He became the president of the company in 1989, CEO in 2003, and most recently, he became CEO and chairman last year to concentrate at a higher level. He served on the board of directors for the Precision Metal Forming Association, Indiana State Chamber of Commerce, Indiana Manufacturers Association, and New Horizons Rehabilitation. Jody attended the University of Cincinnati's College of Applied Science. He is married with 3 children and enjoys golfing and spending time with his grandchildren. So thank you, Jody, for joining us this morning. Next, I would like to welcome Lauren Mynsberge. She leads workforce development efforts at Batesville Tool and Die. I apologize for that brief pause. She oversees the company's training programs, tuition reimbursement program, wellness program, and focuses specifically on employee engagement and retention. Prior to COVID, much of her time was spent in classrooms advocating for initiatives, benchmarking, and promoting manufacturing as a career. Lauren enjoys traveling and spending time with her 3 kids and husband. Welcome, Lauren. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Bob Wu. He serves as the vice president at Subaru of Indiana Automotive. He is responsible for production control and information systems. He's been with SIA for over 25 years in various strategic and operations planning, MIS, factory floor execution, and control systems functions. He also worked previously for 6 years with then Cimix, a mid-size manufacturing ERP vendor, as the senior implementation consultant on advanced planning and scheduling systems. Bob is a graduate of Purdue University with a degree in industrial management from Krannert, with concentrations in computer science and industrial engineering. So welcome, Bob. Thank you all for your time today. To get us started, I'd like to pose to the group, piggybacking on what we just heard from Dr. Frohlich, what is the current state of your business, and what would you say is your biggest takeaway from 2020?
Can I go first, Renee? Okay, the current state of our business, we are a tier 1 automotive supplier. And I think with Bob, we're going to get a pretty good automotive perspective today. Right now, we are back at full 100% pre-COVID levels. We were shut down for a period of time. The automotive industry was shut down for a period of time. I think our sales in April were off 97%, something like that, which, you wouldn't think is even possible. But then in May, it started coming back, gradually ramped up until about, I'd say September, we were back full, which is where we are right now at full pre-COVID levels. But doing that, and I'm sure we'll get to this later, understaffed and maybe a little overworked with a lot of our people. But the biggest takeaway, I think, we'll talk about more things later, is probably that the people in your business really matter, especially going through something like that. It's such a health crisis more than ever. because it gets really personal. So that's how I would summarize it.
Lauren, do you want to go ahead?
All right, I'll let Jody take that one for tool and die.
Okay, maybe our sequence is a little bit off here. I can go ahead and kind of respond next from our point of view as Subaru. Yeah, you know, kind of reflecting what Jody mentioned in the automotive space, obviously we were more or less forced to shut down. And that's, you know, not just predicated on our ability to run operations here, but really predicated on the overall, you know, larger supply chain impact, which is that, you know, with so many suppliers in different regions of the country, not just Indiana, but other states and other countries, you know, the pandemic was more of a sudden issue. And so shutdown was almost inevitable. We are basically back to full production meaning at least a minimum of, you know, full 8-hour runtime with the shift schedules that we normally work to. We are definitely nowhere near the original planning volumes for the year that we set out at the beginning of 2020. You know, workforce stability continues to just be an ongoing issue. Obviously, supply chain, you know, supplier issues related to COVID-19 still create occasional disruption. These are just things that we feel we're going to have to deal with ongoing. You know, as far as reflection of 2020, you know, similar to Jody, it's really about the people. You know, our workforce needed to be protected. Going into a shutdown mode with the size of workforce that we have, you know, our ability to start back up really depended on whether or not we could get almost all of our workforce back into play, you know, when the time came. But another factor that, you know, we often talk about in the manufacturing space really has to do with the supply chain itself. And, you know, in the automotive space, supply chain at our level tends to be less about raw materials. It tends to be more about other tier suppliers that produce, you know, whole parts or components or modules for us. And what we kind of realized as a reflection point was, you know, when things run well, right, in this large supply chain and complexity of operations, we don't really think about all the detail that goes on and how the suppliers actually operate in their own individual markets. And typically, we assume we have sufficient staffing and expertise here to deal with those kind of occasional problems in the supply chain, right? But when you have something as large as the pandemic that suddenly hits, this is akin to, you know, a simultaneous shutting down of your entire supply base, where, you know, you really don't know whether anybody can get back up and running, let alone in a coordinated fashion. So what we realize is that when we deal with a few suppliers that have problems day to day, you know, we can handle that. When we suddenly have to deal with the entire supply base, you know, we just don't have, even with the skill sets and resources and staffing, we just don't have the ability to manage that volume of impact in a very short time. And so, you know, I'd almost draw the analogy, you know, Dr. Frohlich kind of talked about forecasters who don't know and forecasters who don't even know they don't know. You know, in the planning world for manufacturing, we can plan around abnormality as long as we know what that abnormality is and that there's some certainty around, you know, when it ends. We can't plan around abnormality that we don't even understand or we don't even know. And you know, simple thought is you can put a 20-piece puzzle together if you have the picture in front of you and you know what you're trying to get to in a very short amount of time. Translate that to like a 500-piece puzzle where you don't have the picture and frankly you don't even know whether you have all the pieces in front of you. And that's kind of the scale of what I believe we and many manufacturers were dealing with.
So Jody and Lauren, we heard from Bob about some of the supply chain disruptions that they experienced. What about for Batesville?
I'll take this one for Batesville. And, you know, we experience is a little different because we are another step or two down from the end product. So when the tier one companies or when the car plants would have problems, they make a plan for it and they may slow down production with a plan to speed it back up. And we have to react to all of that. So our schedules have been very inconsistent with, we've even had some plants on a few hours notice say we're going to shut down second and third shift because we don't have these parts from the supplier. And then so we would continue to produce as much as we could, hoping that they would make that production up. Or it's been crazy from a scheduling standpoint. But from us personally, in the beginning or ramping up from the pandemic, the biggest supply chain issues were with component parts and things like that. There was enough filled in the chain that global parts weren't really that much of a problem yet, but we knew that they would be because backfilling the supply chain, especially if things are coming from different countries by freight liners and things like that, takes a while. And then the other concern that we had, which we're seeing now, was raw material. A lot of furnaces for domestic production were taken offline during the pandemic, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of expense to bring those back up. And many steel makers are reluctant to do that. It's very expensive to take a furnace down. And I think that they don't have quite enough faith in the economy yet to bring those furnaces back up. So we're seeing severe supply chain shortages with raw material at this time, more now than we were even during the ramp up. Component parts, we seem to be mostly past that now. The supply chain has been pretty much backfilled from other countries. But as the pandemic escalates in other countries, when things pop up like they just did in England, like they are now in China, then the whole disruption can start over again. So we're not out of the woods by any means. And we just, it's something that we can't plan for. So we're just trying to stay very loose and then react as best as we can. Our workforce has been great with it. We work all kinds of crazy hours, weekends, holidays, just to try to meet our customers' schedules. But I think that we still have a ways to go before the supply chain is normal. If there's another disruption, another major disruption, another shutdown, then the recovery for the supply chain after that could be really difficult for all of us to handle.
Thank you. So, and looking at what was presented earlier, we saw the unemployment rate in the spring was, close to 18%, and then about 6 months later, it was back down to just over 5%. So certainly in terms of workforce, things have been all over the place. So Lauren, I'd kick this question to you. Talk a little bit about the impact the pandemic has had on your current workforce and also your recruiting efforts.
Yeah, sure. So I think for us, our workforce, it was highlighted how important workforce was, as Jody stated. They came to work when we needed them the most, and were as flexible with us as we tried to be with them. As he also mentioned, we had 100% workforce return, which is great. And I think a lot of that is because they appreciate a steady job and job security. They witness that we're trying to keep the workforce first. Our management team did an excellent job at keeping the communication constant with our employees, both while they were at home and at work. So I think they appreciated the constant communication. I think we were able to watch as new leaders emerged in our workforce, which was great. So when we needed them to step up, they were able to do that, especially as other management team members or employees in general were sent home due to the illness. It was nice to see people step up in positions that they don't normally take on. And it was nice for management to understand the new values for our employees. So the increased flexibility and the personal time is what matters most to our employees. So some of those changes will continue on throughout the duration of this year. So it was nice for both us and the workforce, but as far as recruiting goes, it was hard to find workers prior to the global pandemic. So it's still hard. And now you've added in that we can't get into the schools and we can't get into other companies to benchmark. It's just made it a lot more difficult. You know, so finding new ways to attract workers is still a challenge. It's just now we have to do it virtually, right? So we have to come up with new ways to reach all sorts of individuals. Students aren't always in the school, so now we have to find a way to reach them while they're on their Zoom meetings from home. So that's been our biggest struggle with recruiting efforts. But it's also added in a benefit for us to look at our overall recruiting efforts. Some of these practices will stay even if the students return to the schools, just because it makes a lot of business sense for our company. So.
That's great. And Bob, from your perspective?
Yeah, really kind of echoing some of the same points that Lauren talked about. You know, for us, obviously, attendance is a pretty key element to being able to keep our process running. You know, we're large assembly, very process, very kind of in line, in sequence build type activity. Generally speaking, we run with a fairly lean manufacturing manning arrangement out there. So, you know, bottom line is even when we have tiny attendance hits, if they just happen to hit on a few key processes out there, even something like that can stop us. We kind of knew that, you know, going into the shutdown and as we started planning for how to return to work and start back up. So, you know, elements around how do we respect and protect the issue our workforce would be dealing with outside of the plant, and you know, really on our own make arrangements, right? We couldn't necessarily expect that in our case maybe 100% was not going to be an attainable goal for return, but you know, what is kind of a minimum run level that we could at least sustain. We put a lot of tools out there to kind of survey our associates as we were in that shutdown period. You know, obviously trying to gather input and sentiment around, you know, how did they feel things were going, what was the likelihood of them returning to work, what issues were they dealing with related to COVID, whether it was themselves or family or, you know, other related activities. Certainly the shutdown of the schools created a major issue for us with, you know, parents suddenly trying to also find daycare. So all that being said, you know, we kind of knew that our prior problems, as Lauren mentioned, around just finding workforce, really were going to be exacerbated and multiplied that much more. So you know, we had to think about some early strategy. And while we may be kind of self-serving in terms of saying, you know, right away we kind of decided we had to go out and find a very significant buffer of additional workers to basically try to bring in a short amount of time, just knowing that our attendance levels were likely to be problematic when we tried to start. So you know, that's just trying to forecast and understand what your data is telling you around the potential for people coming back to work and particular positions or skills that we may end up having gaps in. As far as overall recruiting, you know, we're struggling like many other manufacturers in Indiana were, even prior to COVID. And certainly as we try to get back up and running full bore, you know, the workforce availability, even though unemployment rate seems high, the workforce availability isn't actually where we would consider to be a good draw in terms of finding people. So we've done a lot of things from just kind of a company recruiting initiative point of view. You know, we've had to move into additional wage adjustments, progressive scale acceleration to reach full wages. We've had to do things around recruitment incentives just to bring people in. Obviously, using our own workforce as kind of our best, word of mouth recruitment tool, and offering a lot of kind of referral type incentives, basically just a broad scope of, possible associates that we could bring in here. It's definitely not smooth yet. And, I would just say that we're able to maintain kind of that minimum run level, knowing that daily attendance is kind of an issue that we still struggle with.
Renee, I know we want to move on to another question, but if I could add to what Bob said and highlight a couple of Lauren's points, the other things that, that he mentioned that we also face, attendance has been a real issue. We've always had a really good attendance, and our people do a pretty good job. So it's not that they don't want to come to work. It's with all of the rules now with, if someone is exposed or a family member is exposed with the quarantining, you lose somebody for 2 weeks. And that hurts a lot, especially when you're already running lean. So you've got that to deal with now. And then on top of that, Bob mentioned that they're doing all kinds of recruitment tricks. We're doing the same thing, whether it's, bonuses for bringing somebody new in. We've added an attendance bonus. Our wage scale has gone through the roof. And the thing is, once that happens, once you make that adjustment, now you're stuck with it moving forward. That's not going backwards. And, since we are a tier 1 manufacturer, our opportunity to recapture that cost and price increases is just not really existent. It's not allowed in our industry. So that's something that'll hit us hard, and it'll take us a long time to deal with that. So we have to become more efficient. And your efficiency doesn't improve the same day that the wage rates go into place. So that's where we'll start focusing now, is on continue to improve our efficiency. We want to be consistent with the people that we have, reduce turnover, and make sure that we've got our same group in here every day.
So gratefully, manufacturing in an industry in Indiana was deemed essential, and many manufacturers were able to continue operations throughout the pandemic. But we've received an abundance of federal resources and different changing policies at the federal level and at the state level. So I'm curious to know, how has your company interacted or engaged with government during the pandemic?
I can take this for Batesville, Lauren. I'll make it quick. We've been very active with our advocacy over the last decade or two, actually. And I would, on a normal year, make at least 2 trips to DC every year to visit with our representatives and senators and things like that. And we're lucky to have some, as you guys know, very manufacturing friendly representatives from Indiana. So their offices and them personally were a tremendous support for us, because, there were things that we needed to know to make decisions on before it became a law, like the PPP, the whole stimulus program. Greg Pence's office and Greg Pence, Todd Young, Mike Braun, all of those guys and their offices were very accessible, and they were willing to ask, what do you guys need? What's your opinion of this? So while they're crafting these stimulus packages and things like that, and how to help businesses out and individuals, they're on the phone with us. So that was a tremendous help for us, and I think for them too, because we were able to give them a perspective of, well, here's some of the unintended consequences that might come from that and things like that. So I think that regardless of the current commotion in Washington, that the Indiana representatives did a great job helping us through this and giving us the right information that we needed to make decisions.
Yeah, and I would kind of echo a lot of those things that Jody mentioned. In this type of situation, it's all about information. It's all about understanding the decisions that external entities are making that potentially would impact your business or your ability to run as a manufacturer. We as Subaru, we have government relations offices in DC. We have folks up in our sales organization in New Jersey. We obviously have our own folks here at the plant. And so, really reaching out to kind of those state, federal entities by many of our people to provide similar levels of input as Jody talked about, just also to reach out and kind of get help in terms of resources and really connections. I think the key part here is sometimes the state, federal entities, they're not always the actual source of the support that we need, but sometimes they do a great job at kind of pointing us to other people, other organizations that can support or can help with that overall coordinating effort. The biggest challenge we had right up front was just understanding all the rules around, the PPP, as Jody mentioned, kind of issues that would be related to pandemic pay. How would we, in a sense, keep our associates protected financially, as well as health and well-being. And those are things that helped lead us to quick decision making on what to do right off the bat. How would we make sure that we as a large employer are not only complying with all the established rules and potential new mandates that came out of whether it's state or federal executive offices, but frankly, what's the right thing to do, period. And the state government agencies helped out. I would actually just kind of commend more some of the kind of quasi state and government entities, such as IMA, such as Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, Connexus, all these organizations that really served as part of that link to those government agencies and kind of helped with the gathering of requirements and input from more than just us as a single manufacturer, and help provide some of that coordination around messaging, right? So we talk about having one voice type activity in a lot of internal things that we do, and I think this was a case where really the larger state population of businesses and manufacturers kind of needed to have that same one voice to our government at the state level, and then hopefully that translates back to the federal level. So yeah, that's kind of the general activity around how do we make sure we stay engaged and interact with those agencies.
As we all know, we've had to find new ways to work, whether it be dispersing staff and sending them home so they can leave the necessary staff in the actual facilities. We also have staff that need to be home for childcare issues, as was mentioned earlier. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on the future impact of remote work for applicable positions. We all certainly know to make things, we need folks on hand, but that doesn't necessarily need to be required for others within your organization. So maybe Lauren, as the workforce guru on the call, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we had actually already started a remote work program prior to the pandemic. I'd say the pandemic sped things up and kind of forced our hand, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're finding that it was very beneficial for certain positions. And different generations appreciate different benefits, right? So for some of our younger employees, this actually has turned out to be a perk for them. To be able to have that flexibility. It just gets back to catering to what all employees want, right? So I think moving forward, we're going to use this as a recruiting tool for positions that it's a good fit for. I think we will look at it across the board and see where it suits us best, but I don't think it's going anywhere for our company. And I think we'll just continue to dive deeper into it. It's also forced our hand a little more into different forms of communication rather than just doing all users' messages. You have to take into consideration what types of communication methods they have at their house. So we've utilized our website as a company-wide bulletin board which has also been very beneficial for our employees. So we have nonstop access to them regardless of their work situation.
That's great. And from Subaru's perspective?
Very similar. While we never thought we would be in this mode of remote work, just because of the nature of our business, it's pretty evident that obviously the manufacturing side of the operation, people have to be here. There's really no way to get around that. We have a lot of our kind of administrative professional staffing that are fairly tied to daily manufacturing operations. So there's really a certain element of attendance that we're not going to be able to stray from in terms of people being physically present. Now, that being said, obviously we quickly looked at a lot of the other kind of support areas, areas where they don't really have to specifically be here, and that for us probably turned into more of a mindset change more than anything else. We're used to being entirely open office. If anybody's ever been here to SIA, to our plants, our offices, we're 2 football field sized open offices where all of our people come together, and that creates a lot of benefit in terms of just daily work interaction, kind of ad hoc interaction as necessary, the ability to pull people together very quickly when we have certain issues and task specific needs. We're finding that that's difficult for sure, but where we can, we had to move to a remote work arrangement right off the bat when we did our shutdown. Obviously that just became a forced need, and almost everybody went into a remote work mode. As we started back up since May of last year, we've actually remained in some of that work from home capability for a lot of our staffing, and we kind of expect that will continue. We do struggle, as I said, on kind of the daily routine of how we were used to working here at the plant, but we recognize that for the ability just to space out, protect our staffing, we had to institute and stay with kind of a rotation plan for many of the areas, and really, as Lauren said, we're learning some things, right? We're learning that maybe our original mindset around everybody should be here and have to be here every day can change, and we are linking that to some recruiting needs where we in our industry may have certain skill sets that frankly we just can't easily get in our region, in the Lafayette area. And so those types of skill sets are kind of a good fit for the potential to adopt a more flexible work arrangement where we can allow a certain amount of remote work or work from home capability, and basically expand our geography of where we can recruit and attract talent. So we are definitely considering all that. For us, there's probably not quite an end in sight yet around how long we continue. Obviously, the broad availability of vaccinations is one factor. For us, it's probably more about looking at the overall indicators. So what are the indicators around efficacy of those vaccinations? What are the infection rates doing? What are the local and state areas still mandating in terms of quarantining, or what are the schools doing, things like that. So it just makes sense for us to keep the capability and definitely just leave flexibility in place, even though it's not the ideal condition for us.
So final question before we wrap up our program today. From IMA's perspective, we've heard about the ongoing strain that healthcare costs have on businesses in Indiana. So I'm curious to know what are some changes or impacts on your company in regard to healthcare offerings you'll provide your employees moving forward.
I'll take this one for Batesville. Honestly, right now, Malika, it's probably too early to tell. We offer everything now. We have an on-site clinic. We're looking at more access to the on-site clinic. It was great going through the pandemic that our people had that quick access, so we could react quicker than most companies or most of the public could. But I think that we still don't know. I honestly expected to see a drop in healthcare for a while because of all of the elective procedures that weren't taking place, and thought that would cut costs, and we didn't see that. And I thought that, well, we would see a follow-up this year with the COVID-related costs, that whether it's our workforce went through or just increases that are passed on by the healthcare community. So we've not seen really much change in the actual exposure costs at this time. I believe that we will, but I believe that we'll see, there's gonna be more pressure because of the tremendous pressure put on the healthcare industry in Indiana when those costs are passed on to the insurance companies, to the private institutions, things like that. We're worried about the effect that has of what was already extremely high costs. But as far as offering different things to our workforce, it's really unknown. We don't know what else we would offer. They have full coverage now. There may be some things that are required by law that come down the pipe. It's just changing all the time. We're trying to stay loose, and we'll react to it, and we'll do what we need to take care of our people.
Yeah, similarly for us, we haven't got to the point where we feel that any significant changes in the overall healthcare benefits is needed. Obviously, we've done some things to adapt, right? With the pandemic, with the shutdown, with a lot more people still being quarantined, with personal visits to doctors' offices still being somewhat limited. Telehealth is probably a good example of something that started to gain more traction just in the general, outside space, and we've had to adapt. That wasn't something that we necessarily had thought about in the past or had appropriate coverage for. So that was, a very specific change in the healthcare coverage. Upcoming is more about, costs related to vaccination services. So obviously, we all know that the vaccines themselves are being provided or subsidized, but the services to deliver them and the costs associated, those are things that we obviously expect to incur as a company. So those are incremental costs that we want to make sure we cover for our associates. Beyond that, like Jody talked about, we had a fairly good, fairly comprehensive healthcare package already in place. We continue to look for ways to tweak and improve at cost levels that make sense. Our HR benefits folks have been working for a number of years, and frankly, every year, constantly assessing the type of competitive coverage we offer, and how can we still provide that without having to go to employee premiums, as an example. Beyond that, I think we feel pretty strongly that our current coverage, our focus on wellness programs, preventative healthcare, these are things that are going to continue supporting a pretty strong workforce for us, and frankly, will be that ongoing attractive recruiting tool. So yeah, it's still kind of a wait and see. Are there other things that will come down as mandates more than anything else? And obviously, with the change in administration coming up, those are activities that we have to stay focused on.
Well, we are at time today. Jody, Bob, and Lauren, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was really great information. I know the attendees that are on the webinar today, I'm sure they had a lot of great takeaways too. So thank you for being with us, and everyone who's joined us today, thank you for your time and supporting the IMA. If anyone has any last parting remarks.
I just want to thank IMA and MEP for kind of sponsoring this. Again, I think one of the takeaways we always try to help publicize is that use these organizations, be involved, stay involved, use them as resources, and provide support back to them. And ultimately, they kind of help us all out. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Bob said. This is not a IMA requested plug, but you know, we use the IMA in our national association too a lot during this pandemic as a source of information. The IMA's daily update was great to get us the access that we needed. It's times like that that you really need to be part of an association because there's strength and knowledge in numbers. So I also would like to thank the IMA. I know a lot of that was being done remote. We didn't see a drop in our services from the association. We actually saw an increase. So I know that took a tremendous amount of work. And I know that we as a company really appreciate that.
Well, thank you again, and thank you, Purdue MEP, for your partnership and ongoing collaboration with the IMA. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate the services you guys offer to the manufacturing industry. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah, thank you very much.